now?
We can, yeah, absolutely fine.
Good. Sorry about that. Slight hiccup. First time I've done this on Zoom. And welcome everybody, and nice to see Tex on there, and Colin G6MXL, Jeff ON8NT, who contributes to PW, Ian G3ZHI. Who have I forgotten? Anyway, and G4VZV, who will have a contribution in a forthcoming issue. So 50 plus years in amateur radio, and I'll start with the early years. I'm going to go through this fairly quickly, but I hope you'll find it entertaining. And, it all started with this, really. You all know what it is, Radio Caroline. I was listening to the pirate radio stations in the 60s, and then I discovered on 80 and 160 meters that there were radio amateurs because they were on AM back in those days. I also did a lot of broadcast listening. I joined the ISWL, and in fact, at one time I wrote for their magazine about broadcast listening, not about amateur radio. We had a school radio club, and we bought one of these Philips PCR radios that you can see at the top right. And I also had access to an AR-88 through the cadet force at school. So I was doing a lot of listening. I'd come across radio amateurs, decided I wanted to get licensed. But so before that, I built my first receiver, and this was a Kodar Mini Clipper. This wasn't mine. I found the picture on the net, but you get the idea. Plug-in Denko coils. Probably some of you remember those. And a tuning control, a reaction control, and a fine-tuning control, and one valve. So that wasn't particularly good for amateur radio, but don't worry, I got things organized. In 1968, I took the radio amateurs exam. This was the paper I took in May 68, and got myself on the air with a Kodar AT5 transmitter and a Lafayette KT340 receiver built from a kit, which, if I remember rightly, I bought in Tottenham Court Road or Edgware Road, and couldn't get it going. And then, fortunately, G3PBV lived just around the corner from me, worked at Hanslope Park, and it turned out I built the thing beautifully, except that it needed a lining. And fortunately, he had the test gear to be able to do that. So those were the days. And I used to do a little bit of portable operation. Here I am on Dunstable Downs with my dad's car. That was probably before I could drive. The bonnet's open, not because the car's broken down, but because I'm taking power off the car battery. And just a vertical antenna. And as I recall, the guts of a 19-set variometer to tune it. And that was my first QSL card. Well, a Kodar AT5 was all very well, but I wanted a bit more power, and I was able to buy a second-hand Heathkit DX100 transmitter. Now, I bought this from a guy in Derby, and he brought it down to Northampton, where I was then living, in the back of his Mini. And how he got it in there, I don't know, but it was one hell of a job to get it out again. You can see some other venerable equipment in that picture, a Class D wave meter, an Edison EC10 that's been added to the KT340. The 19-set variometer is in the box here, and that little box on the shelf, the radio on the shelf is a 2-meter, as I recall, was a 2-meter transmitter of some sort. But when I went to university, I had access to something a little bit more serious, Yaesu twins, the FL401, FR401, and a homebrew amplifier. And that made a big difference to my operating. I realized that there was a world of DX out there that I just hadn't had access to. We also took that set up portable believe it or not, to Scotland in a battered old Land Rover, and a generator with us. You know, this was portable operation back in the 1970, I guess, or 71. And in fact, the following year we went to Switzerland. Here we are in Geneva on a scout campsite, and they let us put a dipole up on their flagpole, I should say. And we had great fun from there. Also operated from the ITU building in Geneva, and then went on to Liechtenstein, HB0. And that was mainly on 160. We were a bunch of 160 meter enthusiasts in those days. But afterwards, after university, I started work with Post Office Telecommunications, which became BT in due course. And with my first month's paycheck, I went halves with my mother and bought a battered old Ford Anglia 105E. But with my second month's paycheck, I bought a second-hand FT101, which you can see here. That was a great rig, especially when the front-end amplifier transistor blew up, because it then stopped overloading and I could actually hear things on it. The receiver there is an AR-77, which I believe was a successor to the AR-88, but it was a cut-down commercial version for the broadcast listener, so that they could continue making things after the war. You can see on top of the 101 is a Europa transverter for 2 meters. No, for 4 meters, if I remember rightly, because for 2 meters I had the venerable Liner 2, which you can see under the shelf above, or Liner Spew as they were known, because they mixed together a whole lot of crystals and produced every frequency under the sun, in addition to the one you were actually operating on. Anyway, let's move on to the 80s. I got married and we moved to Cambridge, and I was able to put up my first Yagi antenna. You can see it here. That's a 3-element J-beam, a TB3. And the station quickly became, well, a little bit later than that, I guess, an FT1000. And I got through various linears. This wasn't the first one. The first one was an FL1000, and then a TL922, and then this Alpha. And you can see an FT726 on top of that. So that's for 6 meters and 2 meters. And on top of that, the PK232, because this is when datacomms was starting in the mid to late 80s, I guess. A 286 computer at the side there, running an early version of G3WGV's TurboLog. So I was already into computers quite early on. And that was our QTH for the last, well, in fact, for 30 odd years, from 1984 until last year, when we moved to the present QTH in Somerset. And you can see the 3-element tri-bander up, and with a 6 meter Yagi above it. So I just go through a little bit about my various operating interests. Contesting is one, and this is me operating from Jersey, which I did on several occasions, either alone or with others. And that was quite a good QTH, because that antenna support had a halyard at the 250-foot mark, which we could hang a top band dipole and an 80 meter dipole from. And we could put Yagis on the transmitter building roof, the transmitter building that you can see there. This is the ITV station on the north coast of Jersey. One hell of a QTH, nice place to operate from, and quite a contrast to this, which was the G0KPW multi-multi operation in East Anglia, which then was from a farm, You can see bales of something or other in the background, and it was very, very cold and very unpleasant. But we did put up a lot of antennas at that location. Excuse me, separate yagis, separate towers for every band. But they had to be put up field day style and taken down after the weekend. So that was a hell of a job. But we had some good fun from there over the years. But I did get fed up with contesting in the autumn from the UK because it was always cold and wet. So when I was invited by the voodoo contest people to go to Ghana, I thought, yeah, we'll have a bit of that. And so in 1999, I went down there with them, and we operated from the Oyster Bay Hotel on Cape Coast and had a lot of fun. And they were out there every year to West Africa, moving on every couple of years to a different location. And I tended to go every couple of years and join them. So a couple of years later, we took this minibus from Ghana across country to Burkina Faso. I stayed at the Hotel Splendide in Ouagadougou and had great fun. You wouldn't be able to do this at the average Marriott or whatever in the UK, but back out there, they thought it was wonderful what we were up to. Had a big sign in the lobby saying, "Bienvenue les Voodoo," and keeping track of our score as the contest went on. In 2002, I went somewhere a little bit different, to the Galapagos, where there was a permanent station built and managed by a bunch of American friends with 432-foot towers, one for 10 meters, one for 20, one for 15, one for 40. And for 80, they had a dipole slung between a couple of them, and then another dipole between two of the others at right angles so that they covered everywhere. So that was good fun. And then back to West Africa the following year, to Niger. And a bit of a miss for a few years, and then to Guinea in 2008. Again, you know, multi-story hotel and allowed to put antennas on the roof. There wasn't very many people actually staying there. The room, for example, in that hotel looked great. I opened the fridge and the door fell off. That was about the way it went on. But by then, our equipment had been in West Africa for a number of years and had deteriorated. And we'd been to most of the countries that you could get to overland. So we basically backed out of that and started looking for other places to go, which is how in, I'm not even sure which year this was, but we ended up at 9K2HN's place in Kuwait, and that was a lot of fun. The actual station is just 8 kilometers from the Iraqi border. And you can see it's a very nice station. It's on a farm that Hamad's father owns, and he's built quite a setup there. We were well looked after. But quite differently, in November 15, not with the Voodoos, but quite independently, I got myself an invitation to Greece, to the SZ1A station, the Red Forest Contest Group. They operate from an old school building. The school is closed down in the village, but the village doesn't want to let the school go to rack and ruin in case they ever have any children again. So the Greek contesters are allowed to use it in the meantime and have built quite a decent station there. And something completely different, this was for the WPX sideband contest in 2016. I went to Lithuania and operated from there. I wasn't sure why Lithuania was needing contesters. I thought they had plenty, but it turns out that at Easter, everybody goes home and visits their parents, and they were a bit short of operators because everybody was confined to barracks. So that was quite fun. You can see in the bottom left of this picture, the amplifier, which was, well, we had a couple of those amplifiers. They were a comfortable few hundred watts, let's say, but to change bands, you had to change the PA coil. and nobody wanted to do it other than the guy who'd actually built them, because there's a lot of volts in there. In 2017, I went for the phone contest at the end of October to Bonaire, where PJ4DX holds sway. Steve is, of course, HF columnist for Practical Wireless. I've known him for very, very, very many years, since he lived in the UK. And then, of course, he went out to Papua New Guinea and then to Malaysia. And now he's living in Bonaire. And that was very nice. And then a month later, I was in Thailand for the CW leg of the contest. That was a station owned by Sigs, LA7JO, who's married to a Thai girl and has built a very nice station. The irony is she seems to prefer spending her time in Norway these days, while he seems to spend his time in Thailand. And then in 2018, I was in Oman, and a very different experience, very smart indeed. Lovely headquarters of the Royal Omani Amateur Radio Society. The Sultan died quite recently, but he was licensed and he funded the club there, and we were royally looked after, quite literally. But again, you know, quite different. Last year, November, I went out to the Gambia and did a single operator entry on 40 meters, a single band, single operator entry. High power, I took my K3, as you can see, and the KPA linear, and set, as it turns out, not only a 40-meter record for the Gambia, which wasn't very difficult because nobody had ever entered that section before, but I appear to have set a 40-meter record for zone 35, which includes quite a bit of West Africa. So that was quite satisfying. But I also like doing the expeditions, and they vary from this, which was literally a SOTA expedition. This particular one was, I'm trying to remember, this one was to Blencathra in the Lake District with G4TSH and G3WGV. But this one here was to St Kilda some years ago. And that was quite a challenge getting there by yacht. We had a force 9 gale on the way over. But we had a very nice operation from there. So that the picture on the left, I think, was taken on that St Kilda trip, but the pictures on the right are on OJ0, or Market Reef. And I went there for an IOTA contest with Nigel, G3TXF, you can see in the lower photo. And this reef is half Finnish and half Swedish. And in fact, although we operated from the Finnish half, I think our antennas were actually in the Swedish half. So that's quite an interesting place. And something completely different, expedition-wise, this was a family holiday with my kids to Iceland. But I took a radio with me and did some operating from there. And you know, it's a lot of fun just taking a radio and a fishing pole and operating. The only snag was that you're supposed to have a fishing rod sanitized before it goes to Iceland because they're very protective of their waters. They need a veterinarian certificate to say that you've had it dealt with. Well, of course, mine was just a grubby old fishing pole, and I got stopped by customs on the way into the country and had to explain that this was for radio, and it was only by showing them my radio gear and the license that they let me in. Meanwhile, my 2 children had disappeared off to the other side of the arrivals hall and were pretending to have nothing whatsoever to do with me. But my first sort of serious expedition, I suppose, was in the early 90s when my friend Chris at S6EZ invited me to go with him to Walvis Bay in Namibia. In fact, we did both operations without moving because Walvis Bay which had been run independently by the South Africans, was being handed back to the Namibians. And so we were there for the handover, and without moving, we operated one day as ZS9Z and the next day as V51Z. We had a couple of towers, one with an A4S Yagi for the regular bands, and one with an A3WS Yagi for the walk bands. And we also had a Battle Creek Special for 80 and 160 and 40 meters. I asked Chris as we drove across South Africa towing his trailer with these on, how on earth are we going to put them up? Because it was my first experience of this sort of thing. And he said, no bother, we just find a couple of native lads, give them a couple of dollars each, and they'll put them up for us. And sure enough, that's what happened. But then in '98, I was invited to join a group of friends and go to the Spratly Islands. And our first expedition together, but we decided to do things reasonably seriously. You can see the 4 square for 40 meters here. You can see some of the other antennas that we took, a monobander for 20. And we made 65,000 contacts or something like that. It was the 4th biggest expedition ever, but we decided we could do better. So in 2001, 3 years later, we took a full shipping container of gear to the Comoros, which are in the Indian Ocean off Madagascar, and set up. And we were the first expedition to make over 100,000 contacts. In fact, we did that in the first week and went on to make 160-some thousand contacts in total. So we were on a roll by this time, and 3 years later we went to St. Brandon, which, sorry, I'll get this right in a minute. We went to Rodrigues Island, I should say, which is a Mauritian island, and took again a container, and you can see we'd taken a stack for 6 meters and lots of other antennas, as you can see from the central picture. The bottom right, you can see a full-size 30-meter Yagi. And at the top, you can see Bob U4YOX, who is the power engineer on Guernsey, doing our power wiring for us. St. Brandon came 3 years later. Now, this was a bit different because this was literally an uninhabited island, again belonging to Mauritius, but halfway between Mauritius and the Seychelles. And we had to take everything. So you can see our power station. We took 6 generators, 6 large diesel generators. And we took monoband antennas, of course, for all the bands. You can see the boat that we went out on in the bottom left from Port Louis in Mauritius. And you can see our tent city on the bottom right, because although there was one building on the island, which normally housed any visitors, we used it for the stations, of course, because they're more important than the people. So anyway, our last, this was, by then we'd become the 5-star DXers. We'd separated ourselves from the Chiltern DX Club just because of the amount of money and the number of people who were involved. We didn't want to saddle the club with any liabilities if it all went pear-shaped. And Christmas Island in 2010, it almost did go pear-shaped because our container got as far as Fiji, and then through a series of mishaps never got any further. So we were faced with either calling off the expedition or pulling together something at very short notice to go by air, because people had booked their flights, they'd booked their leave, and we were able, Yesu lent us a whole lot of FT450s, you can see them lined up here, and we took fiberglass poles for the antennas. We'd had no Yagis, but of course by putting them right on the beach like this, they still work pretty well. And although we incurred about £1,000 in excess baggage charges, you could say, well, that was less than the cost of shipping a container. So it kind of changed our attitude on the whole expeditioning thing. So anyway, as it turned out, because G3NUG, who'd been the driving force behind these, wasn't in a position to organize another one, a few of us got together at the convention, at the RSGB convention a year or two later, and said, this stuff of doing big expeditions every 3 years is all very well, but we're getting too old for that. Why don't just a small group of us go and do an expedition, lightweight, fly in, fly out. And that's what we did. We went to the Australs in 2014, half a dozen of us, hence the 6Gs, TX6G. We took lightweight antennas, vertical dipole arrays on the beach, and we made 70,000 contacts in about 10 days of operating, so that wasn't too shabby. But so that was a serious expedition insofar as we staggered our eating so that there was always stations on the air. We didn't all close down to eat, for example. And we had fabulous radio conditions, so we really could keep the stations on the air 24/7. But in contrast with that, in 2015, I went on what you might call a holiday-style expedition to the Gambia. And by that, I mean, although we made 20-odd thousand contacts, we did stop and eat together, and we did some touristy things, looking around the country. It was the first time I'd been to the Gambia, and just generally enjoyed ourselves. But then it's not so rare as some of the other places I've been talking about. So we didn't feel that we had to kill ourselves. But those of us who went to the Australs went to the Chatham Islands in October, November 16. And those are 3 hours beyond New Zealand, 3 hours on a prop plane, and fairly remote. So they belong to New Zealand, but they count separately for radio. And that was an interesting one. But closer to home, as the sunspots have been disappearing, there are places you can go that are quite interesting. And one of them is ZC4, the UK sovereign bases on Cyprus. And in January 18, a group of us went there. You can see half a dozen of us, and had a lot of fun. Loud signals into Europe, of course, but constant pile-ups because it's a rare one. I've also been involved, of course, in a number of special event stations over the years. M2000A for the millennium, GB50 for the Queen's 50th on the throne, which we did from Windsor Castle. We had to have Ofcom in to check us all out before we started operating to make sure we weren't interfering with the Queen's telly. And we did have a visit from the Duke of Edinburgh. Here's one of them, GR100MGY, a special event station in 2012 for the anniversary of the loss of the Titanic. And there've been others that I've been involved in as well. So yeah, those have been a lot of fun, running pile-ups, but from the UK. And of course, my writing, which started when Martin G3ZAY and I were working together in Cambridge, and the DX News Sheet, which Jeff Watts had started, he was a shortwave listener, the same guy who created Islands on the Air. He'd started this, and he found he couldn't carry it on anymore. And Martin and I, cut a long story short, took it over for a few years. We had access to a very early Philips word processor. That's Martin on the right, Gary V3XN at the back visiting and us showing him. This word processor was at our office building. It had been bought by BT to see what this new technology was all about. And the typists were not allowed to use it because the union didn't approve of such newfangled technology. But we were able to use it and produce the DX News Sheet, a weekly news sheet. Of course, there's no such thing these days because everything, all that sort of information is readily available on the internet. But at that time, there was a new magazine had started called Amateur Radio Magazine. And it had an HF column in it, but it wasn't a very good HF column, or at least that was my view. And I wrote to the editor and said, this is not a very good HF column, or words to that effect. And I said, you know, we do the DX News sheet. There's a lot of information in there. It would be useful if your guy actually studied this. And the editor, of course, being a good editor, wrote back and said, well, if you know so much about it, you can write it. So I started writing a monthly column, and I later wrote also a datacomms column for them in the early days of Packet. And then that magazine went belly up, but at the same time, Steve G4JVG, later to become PJ4DX, had been doing an HF column in Ham Radio Today. Some of you will remember that magazine. And I took over the column in that one. So as it happened, without a break, I went from one to the other and continued with monthly columns. Now that magazine was later bought by the RSGB with the hope of having a bookshelf presence, although it never really got off the ground. But for a while they had it. But subsequently, I took over the HF column in Radcom from John Alloway, G3FKM. So again, I found I haven't missed a month since 1983 or whatever, writing a column for at least one magazine. And I did this for 13 years or something until I took over as editor of Practical Wireless, when, of course, it wasn't feasible anymore to straddle the fence and do stuff for the RSGB as well. Although I have, in the meantime, done a couple of books for the RSGB. I rewrote the operating manual. It was supposed to be a revision, but it turned out when I looked at it that it needed a pretty serious rewrite. And from scratch, I wrote a 6-meter book, which became the most reprinted book that the RSGB had ever had. And a few years later, I extended it to cover 4 meters as well. And I'm actually working on yet another rewrite of that now, because it's 6 or 7 years since I did even that revision. And it's time to have a new revision with all the data modes, activities, and so on 6. So I took over Practical Wireless about 7 years ago from Rob Mannion, who'd been the editor for about 25 years. At that time, it was in a very small stable owned by a company called PW Publishing. It was Practical Wireless Radio User, and of all things, a magazine called Falconers, which just for historical reasons had ended up as part of that. That was a quarterly magazine. Well, I don't know what's happened to Falconers, but Radio User and Practical Wireless, about 3 years ago now, were bought by Warner's, who are quite a big publishing house, although there's fundamentally a printing company, but they do publish a number of magazines, and they distribute about 120 magazines. So they have a lot more clout with W.H. Smiths and so on than PW Publishing ever did. And so PW carries on. And at the moment, we're carrying on through COVID-19 because we've got quite a big subscriber base, which makes up for the fact that some branches of W.H. Smiths are actually closed at the moment, unfortunately. I won't say any more about PW, but if there's any questions about it afterwards, I'd be happy to answer them, of course. I've done quite a lot with committees and clubs over the years. I belong to a number of clubs. I'm president of CDXC. I've been president of FOC. I'm a member of various others. I managed the IOTA contest for 12 years, although I no longer do that. And I've been around to various organizations. The Contest Club Finland have an annual get-together, which hasn't always been in Finland. So for example, one year it was in Estonia and we got to visit ES5 TV's rather nice station. That's a stack of 4 Yagis on 15 on the tower on the left. 4 big Yagis on 15, I have to say. You can get reflections off the moon on 15 meters. I've also helped with a couple of IARU conferences, helped on the admin side. One of them was 2008 in Croatia. And I try and get to other events. There's an organization called CNET, which Southeast Asia Network, and they have an annual convention, and I went to that one in Siem Reap in Cambodia a couple of years ago. We've also, here in the UK, through CDXC, entertained a number of visitors. This is Miss Bharati, VU2RBI, back in the 80s. She's still active, and very active from India, and involved particularly in emergency comms. Here's one of our annual CDXC barbecues. And I like to get to Dayton occasionally, or to Friedrichshafen. Although this year, unfortunately, it's not going to happen. The hall in Friedrichshafen, where they hold this, has been turned into, guess what, a German equivalent of a Nightingale hospital. So we won't be going there. Just towards the end, and I'll wrap up in a couple of minutes, something else I have done is to be involved in the World Radio Team Sport Championships. These are a sort of Olympics of amateur radio held every 4 years. And I was a referee in Brazil back in, I think it was about 96. And a referee because they have teams of 2 people from maybe 40 or 50 countries, all bring onto a single site, or at least into a single country, and they try and create as similar as possible operating locations. And each team of 2 has a referee keeping an eye on them to make sure they obey the rules, don't cheat. And that was good fun. And then in Moscow, a few years later, I was a judge. And so I'd been promoted, if you like. But you can see an operating tent here. You can see every one of the teams had an identical tower and tribander and dipoles for the low bands. So, you know, the antennas were identical. The locations were as near identical as possible. And you can see me at the top in discussion with Harry, RA3AUU, who was one of the main organizers. And on the right is Dave Sumner, K1ZZ, who for many years was general manager at the ARRL. So that pretty much wraps it up. Just to say that last year I moved, well, we moved, my family moved to Somerset, and I don't have any permanent antennas up where I had that tower at the previous location. So I'm making do, as you can see, with a nice big fiberglass pole. This was an inverted L for 160 meters. And you can see here in the background that there's actually a phased pair for 40, and in the foreground, fastened to the washing pole, whoops, sorry about that, fastened to the washing pole is an elevated vertical for 20. But it does seem to be a pretty good location. So I'm very happy with it so far. And at the moment, so at this very moment, the antenna is an X-ray called mast with a 4 and 6 meter Yagi on it, a duo band Yagi for 4 and 6, because of course we're in the middle of the sporadic E season. So, and that, Nick, pretty much wraps it up. I hope that gives you something to chew on.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much indeed, Don. I think you've made us all desperate to get out of the country, but I think a lot of us will be happy just to be able to go out into somewhere in this country and operate a portable station at the moment. But anyway, Don, brilliant contribution. Thanks very much indeed. So I'm going to throw the meeting open. If you want to ask a question, just if you've got a camera on, raise your hand. If you haven't, there is a little box where you can raise a hand. Right, first one I saw with a hand up was G8JMB. I've unmuted you. Far away. Did you want to ask a question? Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, go on.
I don't see PW often nowadays. It seems to have disappeared from the shelves. But is it still related purely to amateur radio, or does it cover the world of wireless at large? Having recently been reading some old PWs covering a multitude of things to make, nice to read about them, even if you don't get around to it.
Yeah, PW used to cover audio and all sorts of things, but we split it now because a radio user is part of our stable. Basically, PW focuses on amateur radio and radio user does everything else.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Do we have anyone else with a question? Yeah, David.
Oh.
No, it's not really on and off, Nick. Cheers.
Yeah, you're on. Yeah.
It's not really a question. It's just incredible amounts of jealousy. The expeditions that you've been putting up for myself would be a once in a lifetime, and it looks like you've managed to do them every year. So if you hear of any invitations going, I'm open to receive any of those sort of invitations. Unfortunately, my wallet is a typical Yorkshire one, though.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, people ask about the cost of these trips, but you know, they're not much more than a holiday. At least that's what I tell myself. Not much more than a typical holiday.
yeah, I'm from Yorkshire, and my holidays are very cheap.
I'm from Yorkshire as well. So,
so it's just thank you and absolute inspirational for doing portable operating as much as anything else. I'm not going to be able to go to some of the exotic locations that you've gone to, but we can go out and set up stations. But it just shows why Denby Dale as a club was, when we thought we were doing very, very well with our contesting, why we weren't so far up the tables. When you look at some of the other stations, we thought we were doing really well with a beam and a phased array for 40. But then you look at what the other guys have got, and we've got no chance.
no, but you have fun.
All we do is try to better ourselves every year.
Yeah.
Yeah, Richard, M0RBG.
Yeah, good evening, Don. And that was, as David says, that was absolutely fabulous. Thank you. I've got a question for you, but before this that I'm showing you is my invitation from Neville back in 2015 to go to Spratley. And unfortunately, it was cancelled.
Yeah.
So that's my claim to fame for Big D expeditions. I've been chatting to Neville for a long time about hitching a lift, and there we go. So I'm now 77, so I think that's gone now. And my question is, you were using computer logging back in the 80s. What program were you using back then?
Yeah, I was using a program called TurboLog, which was developed by John G3WGV. It was a DOS-based program, and that was a very early logging program. It was based on a program called Log, which was a contest logging program that he'd written almost as soon as IBM PCs came along. But because John was in the same club as me, I worked with him on the development of Log and then on the development of TurboLog. And when I say I worked with him, he did all the difficult stuff, but I helped him scope out what the program would do, and I was in effect a beta trialist for it. So I got my hands on the logging program very early. For contesting, we used CT from the mid-80s. Some of you will remember that from the States by K1EA.
Yeah, thanks very much indeed. Just back to the Spratley one. Were you going to go on that one, Don?
I wasn't. I had been to Spratley, of course, so I bowed out the second time round, and you know, for a number of reasons. Partly because, if I remember rightly, I just started with PW or something, and anyway, it just wasn't going to work for me. So no.
Okay, thanks very much indeed.
Okay, thank you, Richard. I thought I saw G1DEN, but maybe that was waving me goodbye.
I think so. Yeah, she's watching on the computer downstairs, and I think she's just outside the door here now.
All right, thank you, Gerald.
Yeah.
Right, anyone else? Roger, G4UFZ.
Yeah, thanks, Don. That was really interesting. I'm interested in how the practicalities of how you take all that expensive gear on an aeroplane, packing it. Where do you put your clothes if you got all that gear with you? How do you do it?
Well, it's interesting you should say that, because when I went out to Christmas Island, for example, I had 2 very big suitcases, very heavy, and because I went out for the first 2 weeks and didn't, they were out there for a month in total with a handover halfway through. I didn't have to bring those back. I came back with a very small backpack, which was all my clothes, because it's radio that you go on. If you go somewhere warm, you don't need many clothes. But yeah, I mean, you know, when I went to the Gambia last year, I went with Brussels Airlines. I paid for a second bag because you get a free bag thrown in with your luggage, you know, as your basic luggage allowance. And basically those 2 bags again were largely radio gear, and very little in the way of clothes, because it's a warm climate.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Roger. Anyone else with a question to Don? I'm just going to quickly scroll through. Anyone else waving at me? Yeah, Terry, G3VFC.
Yes, good evening, everybody. And Don, absolutely brilliant. It reminds me so much of the RSGB conventions, and it just matched any of those. Thank you ever so. My eyes lit up when I saw you in the shack with G6UW, proudly rather small on the wall. And I have to say that I have an association with G6UW. My son is there, and through his exposure to DXpeditions and the like, I can live through you and him and many others, all the excitement of the hobby. Thanks ever so much, Don. Brilliant. And thank you to Denby Dale for the meeting.
Yeah, my pleasure. And yeah, I'm a life member of G6UW. I mean, you know, once you're a member of the Cambridge University Wireless Society, you tend to stay around and keep in touch.
Okay, thank you for that. Anyway, Richard, you got your hand up again?
One question, Don. What does your station comprise of today? And if you were to change it, what would you upgrade it to?
Well, funnily enough, for the last couple of years, I've been using an IC7300. I got rid of my FT5000 because it was depreciating so fast, although it was a lovely radio. I've just and I wasn't sure what situation I'd be in when we moved house and whether I'd be able to do a lot of home radio, whereas the 7300 is a very good portable radio. I've taken it on several holiday type trips, but I've just acquired a 7610 just a month or so back. So that's now my main station. My amplifier is an Expert 2K. And for VHF, I have a very old FT847.
Very good. And what were your choices when you were looking at the 7610?
Well, it was between that and the new FTDX101 and the TS890. The CS890 is probably the better receiver, but it doesn't have a second receiver. The 101 I've tried. I got my hands on one to review for PW very early, and it's a very nice radio, but I was a bit iffy about the ergonomics on it. Whereas I've been very pleased with the 7300, and the 7610 is effectively its bigger brother. A lot of the ergonomics are the same.
I thought you might have considered the K3.
I've got a K3. I use a K3 for lightweight expeditioning. I don't consider it a base station radio.
Right, that's interesting.
I have a question.
Duncan had his hand up, Nick.
Yeah, Duncan, M0OTG.
No, he's gone.
Hang on, he's there. Sorry, I've just unmuted you, Duncan. Right, fire away, Duncan.
Thank you very much. I feel I'm a bit of an interloper because I'm the secretary of the Hereford Amateur Radio Society. So, but I did hear that Don was talking. I've written a couple of articles for your magazine, Don, and that was a very interesting talk. I did enjoy it very much. But of course, I don't do any contesting, and I must say I find that the RSGB is a little bit resistant to having anything about old stuff in Radcom, and also there's the problem of putting in stuff about building equipment. I wonder what your ideas are on the future of building stuff and old stuff, because I think those are important issues.
I mean, the Valve and Vintage column in Practical Wireless is one of the most popular. People love old stuff. The problem, of course, both with that and with building stuff, and I think building stuff is great, although I don't do a lot of it myself, is actually finding people to write about it. And that's probably one of the biggest challenges I have as editor, is actually, you know, people are very happy to write about their latest trip or this, that, and the other, but getting people who build things to actually write about it is a challenge.
Yes, I think one of the problems seems to be that the whole of the world has almost turned to digital, and digital requires a degree of ability with programming, and whereas a lot of us, at least I think probably a few of us, maybe are still in the world of analog and quite like being there. So I think it does have a place. I think we yeah. But thank you very much. That's my
pleasure.
Yeah, thank you, Duncan. Right, anyone else got a question?
There's a couple.
I have a question.
Who is that?
It's Ian G3ZHI.
Yes, hi, Ian. Go ahead.
Don, I wanted to ask you what you thought the state of the hobby was, and if it needs what role Practical Wireless can play in its future.
That's a short question, Don.
You want a whole new talk, do you, Ian? Yeah.
Well, I just wondered if you had any thoughts, that's all.
No, I mean, you know, I love the fact that the hobby has branched into so many areas, but it does seem to be an aging hobby, as we know, although I am in the process, I've been in the process of teaching my 9-year-old granddaughter. She's taking her foundation exam this Saturday, so she'll bring the average age down considerably if she passes. But no, I mean, PW will carry on doing what it does. I don't know what more we can do really to encourage new aspects of the hobby or new interest within the hobby or whatever. But I mean, I just try and cover a broad spread.
You do, and I like that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ian. Someone else was trying to get in as well then.
Nick, there's a couple have asked via the chat to ask questions. There's G3ZHI. And
yeah, that was Ian. He's done it. Oscar Acton, you've got a question. Do you want to fire away?
Yes, thank you very much. So I'm sort of a newbie in the amateur radio community, and so I found the talk extremely interesting. Thank you. It's nice to see the history of amateur radio and some of the older operations. My question is, do you have any advice on sort of operating on field days or portable for people who are new to the hobby, and any suggestions? And also, have you ever had any issues getting equipment through customs at the airport? I'm always scared of getting stopped as if thinking I'm trying to listen to something I'm not supposed to.
Well, let me take the first of those, operating portable and field days and so on. Field days are great because you can usually go along as a newbie and help out, put up some antennas, maybe do a little bit of logging, and then gradually take on more as you become more experienced. And in terms of things like special event stations and so on, they're usually short of operators, and I'm sure you'd be very welcome. But again, I still learn every time I go on a multi-operator expedition or contest. I learn from other people, so you never stop. So it's a case of just sitting down with other people. It's far better than sitting at home and operating. When you're out with other people, then you will learn and you will pick up ideas and you'll get better. Now, your thing about customs. No, I mean, I remember when we went to that Switzerland-Liechtenstein trip in my university days, back then we had to have customs carnets to cross all the borders, and it was a bit of a nightmare. Within Europe these days, at least until Brexit is completely negotiated, I guess, you can take radio gear anywhere, and there's far fewer sensitivities about radio gear than there used to be, because if anybody's going to do anything nefarious these days, they're not going to do it by radio, they'll do it via the internet. But having said that, I did get caught going into the Gambia last November. They put all suitcases through an X-ray machine on arrival, and they spotted my radio gear, and I had the license. You do need a license before you go for this very reason. And I had the license, but they said, oh, you're importing radio gear, we need a fee. And it was just a rip-off, but I gave them 20 quid at the end just to shut them up. So it does happen.
Lovely, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Oscar. Right, anyone else got a question? Richard,
here.
Sorry?
Yeah, hello.
Who was that? Richard, go on, far away, G4GCX.
Yeah, Don, you know that radio that you built, and you built it very nicely, you took it to your mate at the BBC who aligned it for you. What make was it, again?
Oh, that was a Lafayette.
Oh, Lafayette, was it an HA500?
No, it was a KT340.
Oh,
the
right.
HA500 was ready-made. The KT was a kit.
Very similar, though.
Is that the one?
It's probably the same radio.
No, it's not. That's an HA500.
Right. Well, I think you'll find it's exactly the same, but it's a kit.
Oh, right. Okay.
Whereas the HA500 was ready. I love it. Brilliant.
Because it's funny that you had a line or two. I've got one in the loft somewhere.
Right.
I didn't put it on because, you know, after 40 odd years, I don't know how clean it'll be. And one of the, well, my first HF rig was a DX100 as well. I blew the transformer on that because I was so eager to get it going. I tuned it into a light bulb, and just you know, a couple of seconds, and it were enough to blow a transformer. And then I got a FT2. Sorry, no, it was an FL and FR 401, just like you had. And the problem with that was there was a beat knob, and they drifted like nobody's business, you know. And then I've still got a FT200 up in the loft somewhere. I lent them to somebody, and they come back all screws missing. And what was it? Oh, blimey! It's up in like, I'm not going to call it a shack because I can hardly get into it. I've got an Heathkit amplifier with a pair of 6146s in, and I let that come back, screws and all lids missing. So anyway, that's Now, I was wondering what you meant when you had that other receiver. But I found mine. It might want realigning, but it's as deaf as a mute.
Yeah,
Sorry,
they were fun.
Really deaf.
Q multiplier, as I recall.
Brilliant. Thank you, Richard.
All right, thank you.
Right, Gerald.
Activity.
Yeah. Hi there. Thank you very much for that first, Don. That was brilliant. It took me my thoughts back to all the old radios like it did to Richard.
Yeah.
Probably got most of them out in the shed here as well. But if it hadn't been for Practical Wireless, I'd probably never been in a radio amateur, because I used to take that when I was in my early teens and built some of those little one valves and things that FG Ray put in. And then I picked up somebody on one of those who was a radio amateur that lived in the next street. So I went and knocked on his door, and what's all this about? Your voice coming through on my receiver I've built. And it started from there, you see. So that's Practical Wireless did something.
I'm very conscious as editor of Practical Wireless that I've picked up on something that has got a long history. I was in Malta the other year, and my son had some meetings there, and I tagged along and played radio. And I went to the radio club, and the chairman said, he said, look, I just want to show you that chap there, that chap there, that chap there. They all started in radio through reading Practical Wireless.
Brilliant. Thank you, Gerald. We have got quite a few, I'm going to call everyone DX outside the British Isles. We've got quite a few people from other countries on the call tonight. If any of you want to speak, you're absolutely more than welcome. So either just unmute yourselves and start going, or stick your hand up if you've got a video running. But feel free to ask Don any questions.
There is one Alpha Fox Sierra.
Yes, go on, far away. Have you got a question or point you want to make? Or just saying hello?
Oh, I suppose you're talking to me. Is it ZS1 Alpha Fox here?
Yes, yeah. Please go ahead.
Yeah, just want to say thank you very much, Don. Nice to see you, and there's a very good talk. And the gentleman who wanted to do the expedition, he's always welcome to come out and operate in ZS1.
Nice to hear you on here, Tom. Tom is another regular contributor to PW, of course.
There you go, David. You got your trip to ZS1. Thank you very much indeed. That's brilliant. Right. Anyone, and Darren as well. Yeah, okay, Darren. Better have a word with Jean as well. Right. Anyone else with a question to Don?
Brian, BFJ.
Yes, go on. Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, thanks very much. Good evening, Don. As a contester, what is your feeling about KST being used in contesting?
Yeah, that would be in VHF contesting, of course. I think that there is, it's a difficult one, isn't it? The whole point of UHF these days is that the antennas are so narrow that you'd never work anybody if you didn't set up a SCED. But of course, some people just abuse it, and that's where the problem arises. So, yes, I'm equivocal.
Yes, okay, well, that's fair enough. But I find now that a lot of the leading stations don't call CQ in the contest whilst or until they've got the multiplayer squares that they require, and then they'll start calling CQ, which is spoiling the contest to my mind.
Oh, right. That's interesting. I didn't know that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think they have SCEDs, don't they, Brian?
Well, yeah, they must have their own contacts, and I don't use KST personally. I dislike it. I think it's not playing radio, to be fair. Maybe okay on the higher bands, and maybe super high, but up to 70 SEMS, I think it shouldn't be used personally. That's my my outlook anyway.
I think I'd agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, Brian, before you go, I thought of you when Don was showing the picture of those fantastic generators, and I thought we need one of those to replace the one we've got in the hut in Farnley.
Well, it won't be a bad idea. I'm fed up of lifting that one out.
Yeah, you immediately came to mind, Brian. Right, anyone else got a question to Don? Yes, go on, Ken, G4VZV. Hang on, I have to unmute you.
Yeah, just
far away, Ken. Far away, we didn't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can. Yeah, no problem.
Right, just a quick update, Don. I'm hoping to get back down to Spain, Echo Alpha 5, in about 3 or 4 weeks' time. But there might be an initial lockdown for 2 weeks, but hopefully back on the air. But I'm also hoping to go to Tabarka Island in the Mediterranean. It's about 5 miles off the coast of Benidorm. And there's a boat goes out to it every 4 hours. But the guy that is sort of guiding me with this, to put it into DX News and also to inform the relevant authorities, is Mike 0 Oscar X-ray Oscar, who I'm sure you'll know very well.
I do, yes.
Yeah, and it's him that's going to guide me and do everything that needs to be done at short notice. And bearing in mind, I've never done anything like that.
Right.
And if you do, it'll just be for 4 hours or 5 hours. I can imagine a massive pile up if I do that.
Yeah, potentially. Well, you're in good hands with Charles anyway, yes.
Yeah. He said he'll sort everything, and that's from QSLing to informing DX News and all that business. So, but that is something for around about August, September, more likely.
Okay, good.
Yeah, thanks, Nick.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks, Ken. Right, anyone else got a question to Don, or we're going to call it a night?
Just saying hello. Do you hear me?
Yes, we can. Yeah, go on. Go ahead.
Okay, this is Jeff, Oscar November 8, November Tango. Just taking the occasion to say hello to Don and to every one of you. I really liked the talk of Don, very interesting. I have been a reader of Practical Wireless from maybe 30 years ago or something. Then I stopped because of family, children, work, and these kind of things. And in the last couple of years, I came back to Practical Wireless. I also have Radio Users, which is a different magazine, but interesting anyway, because I have also been a shortwave listener. Just like Don, I have more or less the same story, you know, listening to the Radio Caroline and swinging Radio London at the Belgian coast. I was living there, so it was a good way to practice our English. I really, just to Don, I really like Practical Wireless. I think the scope of articles is very broad, from valves to modern technology to data modes and things like that. So I think that's really a very good and interesting thing. And there are always practical things that you can put into practice. One of the things I have done, which was an article from the Practical Wireless in May about a remote, making your station remote for digital modes anyway. I did that. It worked first time. So this afternoon I was remotely on my balcony, because we have a lockdown here in Belgium too. I was remotely on my balcony working some 6 meter and 4 meter DX with my small antenna, with my small halo loop on 4 meter, which is 60 centimeters to 60 centimeters on the other balcony of my apartment. So there are always interesting things that you can put into practice, and I would like to thank Don for that. I mean, I think it's an excellent magazine. I have been on other magazines, but I really like the magazine. Thank you very much for this initiative also to the radio club there. I think this is also a very good idea to keep in contact, and of course we should be on the radio, because we have a brilliant hobby in such a situation like a lockdown. I mean, I read that in the US, there are a lot of people who take licenses now. I don't know how that is in the UK. I don't know how it is in Belgium anyway, but this seems to be a good way to attract new young people. And just to spin off my short comment, I think Don has written in his editorial also about this. I discovered that my son-in-law, he's 35 years, started to play with an RTL dongle and is decoding weather satellites now. So my daughter funnily enough, discovered that her father was always experimenting with radios and antennas and computers, and that her husband is actually starting to do the same. That's very funny. I think she isn't maybe not thinking that that's too funny, but I really like the idea. I didn't know that. I mean, he just started with that. So maybe, yeah, you have the old technology. That's true. But I think the new technology is also one of the ways to attract new people into our hobby. So that's it for now. I would say 73 to everyone and hope to meet again, maybe on one of the next meetings.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you, Jeff. Tristan, far away, please.
He's on mute.
Yeah, I'm trying to unmute. Tristan, if you hold the space bar back, that's it. You're unmuted.
Hello, good evening to you, Nick, and good evening to everybody. I just want to come in to say, Don, I'd like to thank you for your fabulous presentation this evening. I've read a few of the practical wireless and some of your articles, and now I haven't had the chance, but the actual things that I've learned from your things you put in practical wireless is very much appreciated, and may you continue the good work, and I'm sure your valid support to the practical wireless and to everyone here by doing this presentation is very much appreciated, and long live we be able to keep up the good work. And I thank you very much for the presentation this evening and for everybody's company and for being part of your club. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tristan. Right. I'm sorry. Before I'm going to call Don in just to say a couple of last words, and also Gerald G3XTT, our club president. Before I do, I was just going to pick up a point that Jeff made from Belgium. I was reading yesterday or today that the foundation license online exams are now completely booked out for June, and they're now, the next vacancies are not till July. So that tells us, Jeff, that there are lots more people coming into the hobby in this country as well, which is absolutely brilliant and will be great for amateur radio. And what you said, Jeff, is right. You know, being locked down in our houses, what could be a better hobby than amateur radio? Talking to people as we're doing tonight all over the world. So thank you for the contribution. Don, if I pass the microphone back to you, and then I'll hand over to Gerald and say a couple of words before we close. So Don.
Well, I don't know what you want me to say at this point.
Any concluding comments you want to make?
No, I mean, you know, I appreciate all the feedback. And incidentally, I would agree with that. You know, as you said to Jeff, there's been an upsurge of interest in the hobby since lockdown. Not just among, you know, well, maybe not a lot among young people, but perhaps among older people who are realizing that there's not a lot else they can do at the moment. And I just hope they stick with the hobby. But we will stick in there with practical wireless. Incidentally, you know, people talk about the team at Practical Wireless. It's me basically these days. It had gone are the days when it was a big team. So gone are the days, unfortunately, when we could produce blueprints and all sorts of stuff. But we soldier on, and I hope most of you read it, subscribe to it, and support it, because it's the only bookshelf magazine these days dedicated to amateur radio. All those others I mentioned, Amateur Radio, Ham Radio Today, Wireless World, Shortwave Magazine, you know, they've all gone the way, unfortunately, but we plod on.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you, Don. That's a nice few words. Gerald.
Yeah, hi there again. It's yeah, I just wanted to say again a proper thank you to you, Don, for that and handling all the questions as well. And thank you to everybody else who's been and joined us tonight. It's nice to see all the faces. And G1TX, I noticed, Texas down there as well, just below my picture on the screen here. And he used to write a lot in Practical Wireless and things as well. So it's nice to see all you guys around. A lot of call signs and names that I've met before, but thank you very much for coming, Don, and thank you to all the guests and visitors, and of course to the club members who helped make this possible, including Nick. Thank you very much indeed, all of you.
Okay, thank you, Gerald. There is a little button called reactions at the bottom. We can show our reactions to Don for his contribution tonight by clapping or a thumbs up. So thank you, everybody. And thank you, Don, for a really, really interesting talk. Next week, we have another excellent speaker. We've got Steve Nichols, G0KYA, from who's very involved in his contributions to RADCOM and the RSGB, written some great stuff on HF propagation, and he's going to give a talk to us on HF propagation, something that any of us in this room that get on HF radios follow avidly. So looking forward to Steve Nichols. So be exactly the same meeting ID next week and the same time, and we'll operate the same thing. So my apologies to our visitors from outside Denby Dale Radio Club. The club made a decision, because we put this on, that we'd make sure our members got in, and we'd admit everyone else afterwards. And of course, if we'd gone over the 100, which we haven't done tonight, so I haven't done it, we will, there's a facility to stream directly from this Zoom meeting onto Facebook Live. So we would be streaming directly onto our Facebook page. So if next week any of you come back and join us and find you can't get in, just go and have a look on Facebook for the Denby Dale Amateur Radio Club page, and you'll see a link to the live stream of this meeting if it's oversubscribed next week. So thank you very much, everybody. I'm going to say goodbye to everyone, but I will, and I'm going to stop the recording, but I am going